Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Hello.
And Sherry's over there giving us her wisdom from.
Oh, please. And you two are on the edge of your chairs. Why is that?
Just happy to be here.
No, it's like you're getting ready to jump and run.
We're ready to fight.
Yes,
That's what it is,
conflict.
because-
Yeah, it is conflict week. Part of it is I think our pre-discussion.
We
know.
did have a pretty good discussion.
Oh, okay, because you're right on the edge. I just noticed that.
Well, I mean, maybe
My
we're
breathing
the.
feels a little not regular either.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
You're edgy.
Well, then we're reflecting the times in some ways.
And the conversation definitely is about what's going on in the world right now, race-wise.
Yes, and a lot of times it's the permutation of race where we don't talk about the kissing sister of class and how
Yes.
we
yes.
do, and I know that part of this American experiment has just been able to divide people, the poorer or working class whites from blacks. There's a phrase called white plus that after the
Never
18th
even heard that.
after the 18th century, when you had a number of Irish and Italian, and so the meaning of white, or who got to be considered to be white, there's a plus.
Yeah.
There's an additional ethnic group, and every ethnic group knows one thing. It's almost permeated through the ethers, like they get a manual when they come here. They can put their knee on black people's necks. The blacks that were born or were descendants of slaves, captured Africans, you are better than, no matter what. And yes, Irish people want to say they were slaves. No, it was indentured servitude. That's very different.
I'm not
It's
not
just
sure I fully followed everything.
White
that you just
plus
said.
means that ethnic groups from Eastern Europe, from other places that were persecuted or discriminated against, and even some Jews do this as well, and light-skinned people from the Americas. Because colorism within the Latin cultures, within the Hispanic diaspora, also, as a darker skinned black, I'm different in Cuba, different in Venezuela than my lighter skinned mother. I'm considered of a lower class. And it's color, it's class, and it's race. And what I think Kamala Harris is bringing to the surface is Indian American, which I think she describes herself first as American, and then she goes into Black American and Indian. And then we throw in South Asian and all the rest of that. But she's bringing to the force that we need to have this discussion, much like we went from Obama, biracial, Kenyan and Kansan. Then we get this white supremacist orange piece of mess in the middle, which was a backlash to Obama. Because there was a part of me that thought for the 8 years that he was in office, I would have preferred Hillary. If we were going to have all that Republican obstructionism and just the monkey posters, and I mean, it was just nasty. There was a part of me that thought, I didn't want all this nasty. And it's still nasty.
It's very nasty.
So it's an internal conflict that I want to be spiritual and be uplifting, and a lot of times I am, and that's where I go into soul age and stuff. But let's talk white plus, where if you are of a certain ethnicity, you get folded into being white because the negative or the other is almost always. So the conflict for me a lot of times has been just being misjudged because of the packaging I'm in. I'm way more open to mediation and talking things through. I just don't like mediating with people who don't know or who haven't taken the time to study our history. It just, it just frustrates me. It just does. So I don't want to talk to people who haven't taken the time to study things. And I know I have a different worldview. But if you're looking to have a conversation with me about my worldview, do some homework. Now, I'm better.
Yeah, but the deal is you are in a profession that you can, somebody some of them have done the work.
Yes.
I have been with people in classrooms and whatever, and they're academics, and you're telling me about every European, everything European, the music, the writing, the best writers, the best everything were European. And so I would say to them, that's all very interesting, but do you know, just name somebody, Toni Morrison, a Nobel Prize,
Well, yeah.
and you don't know that, and you may know the name, but you don't know what she wrote, and you certainly don't know, then these are academics. So I was in the whole thing that they had no value at all. Not everybody, some, but most of them didn't. I remember somebody saying, who was W.E., how do you say it in French?
Du Bois.
Yeah. Who was he? And I had, because I don't speak French, I said, you mean W.E. Du Bois? I said, yes, which is what I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And they were just, somebody just on television just the other day said, who was Audre Lorde? How do you, if you don't know that, at least something, but I was in there all the time, so you do have a plus in the sense of the people, and what you do.
Yes, and then people do come to me to talk about things that are outside of non-ordinary reality.
Right.
And I mean, and even during this time period, I've had certain clients come and ask specific questions about the Black Lives Matter movement, and what did I think about it, and where did I see humanity going? And I still have hope.
I mean, if somebody knows anything about your history other than George Washington Carver, you got to be surprised. I know I am.
I know that I have some highly intelligent and clients. So I would say a good...
I'm not talking about your clients.
Oh, I get surprised about people in general?
Right.
Yeah. But I like surprises. I do, in the sense that yes, as much passion that I can talk about these subjects, I do know that we're at a stage that the conflict is within. That it is our ability to just pause enough to reflect on how did I cause, or what's my agency in creating this reality, or co-creating this reality. So if we're talking about having grievance because you're used to not having to think about someone else, or you don't want to talk about, I think a better way to go about it is even our Constitution, we need to look at and think, well, why do we venerate these people, these founding fathers, when there were abolitionists of the day? Everyone didn't own slaves. So it wasn't as if just because they were in a time period that occurred. And I just read a blog that there was an alternative part to the Declaration of Independence.
I think there were several.
And even the Constitution that got cut out because of Georgia and South Carolina. Ain't it always South Carolina? South Carolina didn't want it to say anything about the potential inequality of black men. Remember, women weren't even considered then.
We don't count.
And so where I'm going with this is that when you hear, Amy Coney Barrett, and she's an originalist following in the footsteps of Scalia, the originalist, you might as well just say, if you're an originalist, you are a white supremacist. Because if you want to keep the words of the Constitution as they were written 233 years ago, with clauses of 3/5 a person and all the rest of that, you're basically saying, I want something to be etched in a moment in time that was not inclusive. So my conflict, if we want to boil it down to our materials, inclusivity or exclusivity, soul or ego. If your religion is talking about exclusivity, if your behavior is exclusive, then you are an ego. And I don't really want to have too much to do with it. I don't. Because if it's not, because how big do our problems have to be on this planet for us to see that we're in this together? Before we stop this same drumbeat about a social construct, race, that we've made economic and we've made political, and I'm sorry, this is not a political movement. I don't see Black Lives Matter. I don't see my life mattering.
Where would the politics be?
That's one of the pushbacks. It's political. No, it's moral. It's necessary. It just is. Because my internal conflict, one of them, is being able to live in this world, still have my spiritual other world that I see as one world, and not teach the cashier at Target.
Good job, by the way.
That I had to instruct. Would you price check that, please? I didn't. Big.
It was good.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll start with a few things.
Okay.
Number one, I'm perhaps the most privileged person that has ever lived. And I'm going to say that on a lot of levels. My personal experience has given me, all kinds of lessons, of course, but I feel like the place where I get to sit is particularly privileged. I'm emotional just because I'm feeling this is soul coming through. This isn't, I'm not sad about it. I'm not mad about it. I am grateful to sit where I do. There was a name that you said earlier, and I don't even know. It was like an A and a...
Audre Lorde.
I don't know who she is. I don't know what she did. I don't know a whole lot of history. But I don't know a whole lot of history, period. I don't retain a lot of information like that. I know, a little bit, and in the last couple of years since we started having these discussions, and if we go back to the forming of the Constitution in our country and all of that, a couple of years ago, Thomas Paine started waking me up in the middle of the night. So in my privileged place, and my privilege is to be one of the poorest people in one of the richest cities or counties,
It is, I think, fourth or fifth,
in the world. So my privilege involves having very strong awareness of what I didn't get and what everybody else had.
So now we're in the hidden specter of class.
Yeah.
I also never felt poor. And we talked about this earlier. I don't attach to gender in a way where I feel less than. My privilege, specifically me, Tavish Cardiff, privilege, has put me in a place where I get to feel good most of the time.
And now if we put it into our raw materials and the conflict between ego and soul, there can be certain souls that get to don or take on the clothing of certain egos that don't have to have the harder lessons, because you basically said, no, I want to come in and be more of an observer, an assimilator, someone who can bring different peoples together, because I don't know who else in my immediate sphere that would have gotten me to do this every week. So privilege is one word you can, but I can also say it's something within the soul, yours in particular. You have ego like everyone else, but it's not an ego that, if it does attach to something, you're either good at not showing it, or you attach in the moment to wear it for a while, and you say, "Oh no, that's not me. I don't want that," which is very different than someone who carries such anger and grievance around. I just want my life and other people who look like me to matter. And I want trans lives to matter. I'm just, and I know we got ignorance and people not knowing what they don't know, and we've got, mentors, and we've got all of that. But in conflict week number 8, right? Scorpio is the 8th sign. We're in Scorpio, but it's the point of, and Scorpio is the sign where the ego goes to die.
And I think that's where we are. And this is where we started the discussion beforehand, is really we're at a place in time in the world, we've been building ego up to this point. And so that's why and I was trying to explain this to you earlier, and I still don't know that I have good words to describe the feeling of being uncomfortable, but at the same time not holding any judgment around that, just being uncomfortable.
And that's why one of the best things to do when you're uncomfortable about something you haven't personally experienced or just observed, then don't say nothing. You just be uncomfortable. You don't have to act on it. You don't have to do anything about it. It's a being. It's just, I feel uncomfortable. And then later you can get a dream that I mean, like right before this election, I went into, I think it was Sunday to Monday morning, went into kind of a panic attack, and just in my own mind, a panic attack. I realized that I just needed to stop thinking. And I did the same thing with COVID with the Rona. That I realized I've been in other lives or in other time periods where things were worse than this. So in terms of my soul, I have felt a certain sense of, I ain't going through that. I'm going to choose or be so consciously integrated with my higher self and my soul that I'm going to choose which lessons I'm going through and which ones I'm not. And it doesn't always happen that way. However, where I feel we are now is not a manifest destiny anymore. Externally. So we're being called internally. I mean that, and it's not as if I haven't said this before, but with each week, I think you can see how, if I'm having conflict with someone, because I do know 20 years ago, I would have asked for the manager target, I would have talked to the woman at the cashier. I mean, I would have just spent, and it was 25 cents. It was a quarter. And I said, my time is worth more than this.
Principle.
My energy. Well, principles, okay, one of my conflicts that...
20 years ago.
It would have been the principle. And is the principle, which is ego and heady, versus the heart. Yeah. Or the soul, where, I looked at her and said, this is probably about as much bandwidth as she has at this point.
And that I think, just taking that concept of bandwidth and talking about ignorance for a minute and building ego. Because I think those pieces are important.
Oh, totally.
And so for me, and the way that my life, I talk about this privilege, but also in my privilege, what my life has been focused on and what my challenges have personally been are, people that I love and really close to come to me and saying, like, you're not worth it as a human being. You personally, Tavish, aren't good enough. Mm-hmm. So I've been under that, challenging my own soul and figuring out, okay, I'm not the sum of what people say about me. I'm my own person. I feel good about who I am. I operate from the soul, and I become strong in that. Now, in my doing that work for the last 25 years, and it's been, you've been with me, it's been a challenge. Okay, yeah. But in that history, black or otherwise, has not come into play in my life. And so when I look at my material, everything that I've learned has put me to a place where now is the time for me to understand those things. Now is the time for me to study, to go home and look up Audre Lorde, and you know, over the past 2 years, I've learned all kinds of things. I forget way more than I learn. Mm-hmm. But the idea that people should be looking in a direction that their life doesn't even support is conflicting for me. And
you talking about looking inside, or
looking just like, okay, I'm a white person. Mm-hmm. I don't know hardly anything about country music. Mm-hmm. But there are white people that live in that world that can't believe that somebody doesn't know about country music. How can you not know? You know, I was never exposed to it. It wasn't my life. My dad owned a record store. It was all a different kind of music. I am full of song lyrics. But early country, I don't know anything. Jazz, very little. You know, I learned the things that were in front of me, and we each learn the things that are in front of us. And being a privileged white person, racial things didn't come in front of me often. When they did, they were big. They were big, huge lessons, and I've talked to you about them, and they're not important here. But several things that seriously impacted me to make me aware of a connection.
But I think that speaks to living more from sourcing your life from a soul perspective than from an ego. Because even when you say, I didn't know anything about country music, it's not in the kind of defensive, like I just didn't know. It's more of a shrug, and I don't, and this is where you want to talk about the conflict of using words, you know, and I think privilege is starting to get worn out, and certainly if privilege isn't coupled with class. So I'm getting, you know, so I'm really done with this surface privilege, white or black or brown or whatever, or black, indigenous, people of color, you know, I mean, and the hierarchy of oppressions. So privilege needs to be coupled with class, and as I said earlier, within communities of color, with colorism, with skin color. And the brown, I mean, do you know that there were brown paper bag parties? That if you were darker than the standard brown paper bag, you didn't go and dance on the stage.
I know that because you've told me something about that.
And so there is this aspect where I came in as a soul choosing to have to look at these different things. But in that, I know that I have the consciousness of I refuse to allow someone to define who I am or my experience. And still have people saying, you're not good enough, you're not this. You know, they don't say they want tall, dark, and, you know, medium height, you know. Or, you know, it's this aspect of understanding. No, I'm just going to shut up and say it's like charity. Compassion begins at home. So it really is about how we have compassion for ourselves. And our ego gets bruised, I think, in direct proportion to its lack of association with the larger soul's message. So bruising of the ego, not getting where you want. Cheeto 45. It represents a level of you got work to do.
Well, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have work to do.
Yeah, but this is the work. You know, it's like the bruising and the wounding, and it. I mean, our nation is wounded and traumatized, but our whole globe is traumatized by, you know, patriarchal, capitalistic systems, you know, religious systems that put us in these hierarchies. So we all have wounds. It's what you do with them. I mean, that's...
Absolutely, and that is why I push this material from a from a place that doesn't have to look at, a lot. It's been a long time since I was getting basic needs met, although I've had that place in my life. It's been a long time since I've questioned who I am, although my children and an ex-husband have definitely put me on the path of like, is the problem me, or, is there something actually wrong with me? And at the soul level, something has always risen up in me and said, you're valid. And so that's the place I stand. I stand in that soul space. My ego gets hit and bruised every once in a while. I might think I want something ego-filled that isn't really in the cards for me, and I learned that stuff quickly. I learned to listen. I learned to pay attention. And so conflict is more something that I observe at this point than participate in.
It depends with me.
But and we go back and forth with this stuff all day long. If your ego gets triggered, you're gonna react in some ego space, no matter what the conflict is.
And I even sometimes I make the argument, not all the time, that even when you're in ego, you may not know what the other person's lesson is, or what the lessons are. So it may be important for you to go to the end of whatever you started in ego. That's not for, I don't think that's for, I know I'm not judging it, even though I do think I'm a member of the evolutionary police. But
I'll have something to say about colorism too.
The evolutionary police is that, okay, we can hang and we can do what we do, but I want to see growth. I want to see evolution. And if you get to a point where you're taking too long to grow, I don't know, then next. So it's, and I'm talking about it jokingly, but we need some measurements, right?
Well, I feel very strongly that if you, measurement, do we need measurements? Really, should we get to measure, because we don't know somebody else's lessons and we don't know, do we really get to? And that's the...
Well, I can measure how much I want to give. How about that?
In any moment.
Yes.
And
so
sometimes you want to give a lot more than other times.
I bring up the Target cashier yet again.
It is.
It was a big deal for me. I know it seems small for you. I've been right about it. You said something about colorism.
I'm trying to figure out, I've always known this. The deal was that the emphasis in all of African American, and there's been much conversation about the owner could go to the field and get any woman that he wanted. The field hand. But it was the women in the house that served his wife that he was having the children. So here's a mistress who has no power, and here's a man who his children are waiting on. And nobody talks about the fact that these children came about because of rape. Nobody talks about how we got there. And it made me start thinking about, nobody has ever said that in my family. Nobody has ever said it, put it in those terms. It never has, whatever. I don't know who these people were. But my being in America with this skin color is rape. And that's not been talked about. Been talked about, he could get the women in the field and all. That's true. But those women who were living in the house recognize, and the children, and I'm writing about it in some level, that my existence in American culture has been through rape. And I haven't heard anybody say that. See what I'm saying? Because they were his kids.
And she had dominion over.
And she just had to say something. I don't know. Nobody has really blown that out. Maybe they have, I don't know. But that was the first time I could say it in those words. That I am here because of rape. and many women don't want, it's so painful. You talk about conflict, trying to work that through my system, because it was always about color in my family. Always, even though it was hidden, was always about what you look like. And I had to recognize that mine was through rape. And that's current. I learned that in the last enough to say that. And how long have I been here? 2 months?
4.
Yeah. Well, think about that. That's a conflict. That's emotional problem.
And so it speaks to what does it mean going forward in terms of restorative justice? Do we have to get the United Nations involved? Because it looks like this country just seems like, oh no, fuck you. It just seemed. Who was the guy 3 months ago said this country just doesn't love us? He was a basketball coach or something.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It just gets to the point where, just imagine what it must feel like for me today to just think 71 million people. You can almost forgive 2016 because he wasn't president, and this one didn't even go to called him basket of deplorables. Didn't even go to Michigan. Didn't go to Wisconsin. Didn't go to, And I even knew in Michigan that she needed to go to Michigan because Detroit is serious about that 1994 crime bill, but that she didn't have nothing to do with, but they were going to put it on her anyway, and so you can kind of not forgive, but you can at least plausible deniability, but there's no deniability now about what has been done. Kids in cages. I'm not going to list all of that. So but it just smacks to the yet again.
Well, let me say
Or
one
still.
of that. Let me
Still.
say,
But
okay.
I was gonna go with still because,
Or still.
and this is
No, still is better.
this is a
No, still.
conversation that is a little bit from carryover from last week, but the evolution of people and where they should be as we've been building this ego energy. And I don't know if we talked about it here or before we started, but young souls, we are full of them. And so meeting people where they are, which is unfortunately in a really ego-filled, selfish place where they are ignorant of so many things,
Mm-hmm.
that half the population is, it's a comment on where we're sitting. And when we look at 2020 and we look at the pandemic and we look at the political climate and the racial climate and rape coming about just all over the place, not even just there, but all these sorts of things being uncovered, 2020 we're seeing clearly. And what we're seeing is that we had established some idea of what normal was. There was a standard of behavior. There was a standard of ethics that we were all trying to be. And the fact is, most people aren't that. And they're not even close. And we got to take some big breaths around that.
Oh, and you're talking about just also these ideals of the American culture, and we're better than this.
I'm talking about humanity as a race.
Humanity.
And the human race.
And as you were talking, something came up in terms of you put children or these young souls on timeout. You put them in the corner for a while. And that's what the Rona did for us. It's like, you need to time out. You need to time out because you're not treating each other with any dignity or collective dignity.
So that's what we're seeing is all of that pushed in your body. And if you could have said, we're going to make everybody aware of how often they touch their face, you could never have done that. But all of a sudden, we did it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, we became aware of ourselves in our bodies and what our surroundings are, right?
We even had to tell people to wash their hands.
That awareness came only because of a global pandemic. We got half the people denying that it even exists. And we've got people believing what they choose to believe based on evidence that they've cooked up or doctored or who. So I get being tired, and I get wanting everything to change and for people to be in a different place than they are, and they aren't.
Yeah, and I get what I understand about that too is that I'm able to have the frustration and at the same time have the knowledge that, well, people are going to get there when they get there. You know what? Slow and slower.
Well, you know what I think is super cool,
Mhm.
and a outcome of this year's conflicts that it just makes me happy. You turn on the television and you see more color than you've ever seen. In every ad, in everything, it's, like every company decided, let's
Let's
all of a
do
sudden
something
do this.
symbolically. You know.
And we talked about Dave Chappelle earlier. I'm just going to bring out what he said about random acts of kindness for people that don't deserve it because they didn't deserve what they got. I mean, that to me is one of the most honest, beautiful things, because I don't know how we arrive at a place that makes up for anything, for anybody. And I'm going to broaden that out to the whole human race. Everybody has had their certain conditions of things that have happened to them that have made them conflicted on trust, on love, on all of the things that we feel like we should be entitled to, and we should as human beings. We've got to take a step back, and I mean, I think everybody's tired on some level of certain things, but when you realize your soul has all of the energy to keep going, and your soul has the ability to hold space for people who don't believe the way that you do, and marginalize and think people are less than them and worry about what color someone is. I mean, it's if you're living in your soul space and you know who you are, that stuff is sad and it's unfortunate and it sucks. But I don't think it needs to define anybody anymore. And I think that there are telephones and there are cameras and voices, and nobody should have to feel like they don't matter. Even in front of half of a population that says you don't.
However, part of being able to exist consistently in the soul space you described.
You can't. You can't.
You can't consistently exist in your soul?
You're constantly
going back and forth. Okay, just making sure.
I mean, you're in this body. There's an ego
so in the
that
body,
protects it.
In the body, we need an apology. We need restorative justice. There needs to be certain things that can point to that says that intention and acts. I love the fact that, there's certain symbolic things that have occurred, taking down monuments and all of that. However, there has to be more.
Our raw material sets up a framework where that internal thing can start happening. I mean, this little program that we have created puts a framework together that allows all of those dots to connect and for people to really start seeing how they connect to everyone else. And, little by little, people will start changing within themselves from within, because the soul energy is a little bit stronger than it was yesterday.
Like the 100th monkey. Wash
And
one
we
banana,
just-
enough of them. Yes.
January 2020, we did the tiniest little shift where, instead of 50 or 49.999, we got 50.1.
Whatever.
0001. It's tiny.
Well,
It's going to take a long time.
I like at the moment of a full moon, the moon starts to wane. And in the waning is in the connection. It's in the ability to say, let's make this work together.
It's breathing around these things and deciding who is the best person or people or group of people to decide what does heal each group. But I think representatives of the groups that people identify, and we all identify with several different groups. But the number one is humanity. And I don't think 50% of us reach that. I mean, so in our raw material, that's our goal.
Keeping our spirit engaged.
Focused on the fact that we are humans and we are connected and we each have our unique experience, because that's what we decided to have. And I mean, you specifically, and me too, took on some hard shit. We signed up, like, give me all of it, give me all the lessons, I'll take, I'm gonna go do them.
Well, I know that there's a certain, I like to call it ancestral resilience,
I've heard that.
Yeah. And I don't think that one, I can't claim that one. I wish I could.
Well, I mean, it's there. I mean,
Yeah, if you
it's
could claim
survived.
having it.
It's
I'm
somebody
talking-
survived it.
Yeah,
And
somebody
it's
survived.
ego that wants to claim or not claim something.
I love
Because
it.
it's available to all of us. Everything that was created is available
Available.
to each of us because we are part of this humanity that created everything we sit in.
Well, there's a wholeness that, as you do this work, I know it for sure, you have a consciousness in the moment that you say, now I can blast this, or I can just go within and move it along. And
But when we're triggered in conflict, when we're in that fight or flight mode, you're gonna get reaction. You're not gonna get reason.
no, and this weekend, watch out, because Mars starts to move again. And I'm not talking any astrology. That's on belief is not required. That's on something else. Here is about your ability to understand what your soul requires of you.
As we try to figure that out for ourselves.
Oh, baby boo.